Welcome to the Lawyers Talk Show on TASC TV. My name is New Jersey attorney Erol Gulistan, and I am the host. Our guest today is attorney Mr. Morgan Browning, who's the owner of his own law practice, Browning Law. Thank you for coming on the show, Mr. Browning, and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Gulistan. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. Mr. Browning, where did you grow up? And what was it like?
I grew up in southern New York State, which is in the northeastern United States, in the suburbs of New York City. It was great because where I grew up is a melting pot of many different kinds of people. I was exposed to people from all over the world who had all kinds of cultural experiences from an early age and all the way up through school.
Excellent. And where are you currently? Are you still in New York?
So now I live in northern New Jersey, which is in the same general area. And again, it is in the outer suburbs of New York City, so there's still a wide variety of cultures that live here.
Yes. And what inspired you to become an attorney?
I became an attorney because there are problems in the world that only certain people with the right training and talents can fix. And because I was able to be one of those people, I felt a higher calling to do a more complex and more beneficial kind of work through the practice of law.
So you believe then that we all have an obligation to make this world great?
I do think that is more or less everyone's purpose here on Earth, yes.
And I appreciate that. Now, would you tell us a little bit about your law practice?
Yeah, I practice what I like to call door law, which is whatever walked through the door. I am a generalist. I practice in a variety of areas, everything from divorce to criminal defense to litigation. If it exists, I can probably help someone with it.
Well, excellent. And from what I understand, you also had some practice as a prosecutor. What has that been like?
That's true. I served as a municipal prosecutor in the town of Hoboken, New Jersey. It's difficult because oftentimes I want to show people mercy. Everyone has, a story for why they've done the things they've done. This was traffic offenses, no murders or anything crazy like that. But for these low level offenses, there's always a story that someone has. And while I want to be merciful, it is my duty to uphold the laws and do what the state has deemed is right and wrong. So sometimes I have to go against my better judgment and prosecute people under the law.
Excellent. And what sort of common offenses would you see in Hoboken?
Oh, it mainly divides between parking offenses and bar offenses. It is very close to New York City. A lot of people go there to party with friends, to have some drinks, to meet new people. And sometimes when that gets a little out of hand, that can lead to mistakes in judgment.
Yeah, many of our audience may not know Hoboken, New Jersey, I believe, maybe the U.S., but maybe even the world, has the most bars per square mile. Not sure if that still holds true today, but if I'm not mistaken, that's either a U.S. record or world record. So it's a very unique situation for Hoboken. So, and
that's
in
right.
terms,
they famously have some what they call the Santa Crawl. They have different bar crawls that are organized events that people from around the country come to attend. So it is very much part of the culture in that city.
And that's definitely a cultural experience that many will enjoy. So that's definitely something to check out and take a look into. Now, moving on to the next topic. I know a lot of attorney colleagues have had some very memorable experiences in practicing law, whether it's the good, the bad, or the ugly. And we all have these war stories, if you will. Are there any memorable experiences that you had as an attorney that you would like to share?
I think my most memorable experiences have been when I have a client whose cause I believe in, and they are being downtrodden by the law. They are being picked on by the other side. They are being treated unjustly. And then I, through my practice, can help them attain a sense of justice. That is always what I find most fulfilling. When the law comes out the right way, which it always should, but we're all human, so it doesn't always. When I'm able to get my clients that justice, that is what I value most.
And that is important because, you know, many times in practicing, many attorneys put on blinders and they don't focus on what the end goal is. So that's very important to stay focused on that. So now, being an attorney can be stressful, as you know. What are the ways to manage stress in a career that can have these sorts of challenges?
You know, the most important thing is the thing you keep hearing over and over, which is to be, it's diet, exercise, and sleep. If you are disciplined about your diet, your exercise, your sleep, that is the most important thing you can do for relieving stress, for managing your own anxiety levels, for staying in healthy patterns. And if you do that, it will have an immense effect on your mental health. It's easy to let those things slip, but it is the most important thing to not let them slip.
Definitely. And maintaining a work-life balance is essential for good health. I mean, there was a recent article that came out this week that I believe it was British Broadcasting who wrote the article, came out with the article, and they mentioned how too much work in a week, throughout a period of time actually kills people. So some people, I know some friends of mine, they're working at some firms where they're putting in 100, 110 hours a week. And when you're working that much, it can be very difficult to maintain that sort of balance. But even, people that are working 60 hours, 70, 80 hours, it can be too much. They were in the article, I believe 40 hours, 45 hours was about the max before working actually has a detriment to people's health. It could be the stress, it could be many other factors that are involved in the work that have a toll on people. So it's very important to maintain that balance, whether it's through exercise, eating clean, eating healthy, and making sure that what we take in, not just food, but everything is healthy. So that means, not putting yourself around toxic people, toxic environments. That's also very crucial. And maintaining positivity. Many times we are who we surround ourselves with. And if you surround yourselves with good people, chances are you'll probably take on a lot of those good habits that those individuals have. And if you surround yourself with not so great people, then you may pick up some of their habits. So it's very important to maintain that sort of balance, especially in stressful careers and in today's challenging times, as we're still in an ongoing pandemic currently.
I agree. That study does not surprise me at all. And I think what you say about the environment that you put yourself in is absolutely correct. It's very easy to fall into the trap of, firstly, biting off more than you can chew, as they say, but also of neglecting your mental health. A lot of people do not think that mental health exists, and therefore it is easy to find themselves spiraling into a bad place because they are allowing toxicity into their life, because they are allowing themselves to be surrounded by negativity, allowing themselves to become sarcastic or pessimistic, and maintaining that sense of optimism, that higher purpose, that thing that gets you up in the morning, the reason that you have for living. It's important to keep that at the forefront of your mind.
Precisely. Without hope, many people they lose sight of what they need to do in life. So hope is very important. And now, Morgan, I know that you practice criminal defense in New Jersey and New York, among other practice areas. And I also practice criminal defense in New Jersey, among other practice areas. Based on what you've seen in many criminal defense cases representing clients, what are some common reasons why or how people get in trouble criminally? Are there any underlying factors and commonalities that you see in these cases that you can point out?
Yeah, I think it's plain to almost anyone that the main causes of crime in our country are income inequality. It comes down to people are put in a bad situation. They don't have good options available to them, and it is too easy to solve their problems by taking shortcuts, by breaking the law. And they are often not given any other good options. And so when they're put in a difficult position, they find themselves making a difficult decision, and it is often the wrong decision. I yearn for a society that is more equal because I think it would lead to one in which crime was less prevalent.
Yes. And I find that is the case. You know, the income inequality, sometimes it even highlights some other issues that we have here in the United States, which, you know, sometimes it could be drawn down based on a person's ethnic background, somebody's race, religious background, it could be gender identity, sexual orientation. There are many different categories that I notice where people can be disadvantaged in our society today. So now
that is absolutely true. I think there's a tendency among people in this country to pretend that that everyone started on an equal playing field, and that, you know, the American dream is that we all start equal, and those who work hard and apply themselves wind up being prosperous. But it's not always the case. Often people face additional hurdles just because of their race, just because of their ethnicity, just because of their religion, just because of what they are, rather than who they are and what they've done. This inequality stems in part from the fact that, especially in our country, there was a period of hundreds of years where one group of people was enslaved because of what that group was. You can't then just turn around and pretend that, okay, well, that history never existed. It doesn't affect anything that happens now. It absolutely affects everything that's happened now. And not only that, the disparity in this country did not end when slavery ended. It continued on through the generations, through the segregation laws, through the Jim Crow laws, through everything that has, through residential redlining, through everything that has worked systemically to keep certain groups of people disadvantaged to the advantage of other groups, namely whites. That prior handicapping has greatly caused the social stratification that we now see in our society. We can't just pretend, okay, well, now we're all equal, now we're on equal footing and we all have the same opportunity. We don't. Because we don't, and because of this history, we still need to work to level the playing field actively. We have to take steps that make things more equal rather than just assuming that they're equal.
Right. And that's a very important point that you touched on, is that we don't all start from the same starting point. Many of us, by virtue of our backgrounds, do have an advantage in the United States, and many of us are at a disadvantage. So we start off from different points, and there is this facade, perhaps, of our society here that we are all on an equal footing. But when you take a look at the receipt of benefits, the filling of positions, political appointments, what you notice it is disproportionately, in the hands of a select few. And what exists and what I see is that there's a large amount of tokenism in America, where small groups of various minority groups are put into positions to give an impression as if we are on an equal footing. But it's more so a limited diversity, but not a real inclusion, if you will. And a few of the things that you mentioned, the Jim Crow laws and segregation, a lot of our audience may not know what those are. Can you explain a little bit what the Jim Crow laws and what occurred with regards to segregation in the United States post-slavery?
Of course. Once slavery ended, especially in the South, but other places too, there were laws in place that would segregate people based on the color of their race. People had to go to separate schools just for their own race. People had to go use different bathrooms, go to different theaters. They were essentially living parallel lives. And of course, the facilities that were designated for Blacks and other minorities were not of the same quality and benefit as those that were designated for the whites. And even after segregation was gotten rid of, there have been other practices that work to suppress the power and social mobility of Black people, such as residential redlining is a practice where realtors will systemically put point Blacks towards poorer neighborhoods and point whites towards richer neighborhoods, with the end result being that people wind up being ghettoized, meaning that you end up with neighborhoods that are purely white and you end up with neighborhoods that are purely Black. And it is perpetuated not because people are choosing to be that way, but because the powers that be are making it that way and perpetuating this inequality artificially.
Yes, and that is correct. I have seen that, and it's definitely the case. Now, from what you've seen then, can you say unequivocally that being a minority in the U.S. is a disadvantage? I mean, how would you interpret that?
Yes, unequivocally, it's a disadvantage.
Okay, so now that we have that cleared up, how do you see the media in the U.S. playing a role in shaping perceptions of people of minority groups? Do you find that the media represents them fairly and accurately as they exist in society today?
That's a very complex question, and it also depends on which media you're talking about. I think as a general matter, the media tend to lag behind social progressive movements in this country. They are slower to pick up on what is more equitable and what is less equitable in representing people of different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. But they do progress. They just progress slower than the rest of society. There was a social movement, especially on social media, to re-examine things like how we treat trans people, trans identity, long before it got picked up in the media. And now, several years later, you do see that the media is trying to be more sensitive about that, trying to show it in a light that is more equitable for everyone, even after the fact. But there are pockets of American media which do not like this progress that is being made, and they would rather revert to older ways of thinking, older ways of structuring our society, where one group that those networks are mainly composed of are still advantaged and do still have all the power. And so for those people who are looking to regress rather than progress, there is a burgeoning media for them. And in fact, it's funny because the main cable news network that was associated with that is now regarded as too liberal for even some people today. After the recent election and after the January 6th riot and everything that's happened, people are moving to even more extreme forms of media. And I think that is definitely a troubling trend and one that we need to be wary of and keep an eye on.
So do you believe where there's smoke, there's fire with regards to this?
I think that's fair to say.
Okay. And what do you think about social media companies? Do you think they're helping to bring people together, or are they doing more dividing than uniting?
That's a very complex question. I think we are united in a way that we have never been before. We are able to drive the narrative of what is important to people and what people are talking about in ways that we never had before social media. You know, we now decide what is newsworthy because we are the ones talking about it. And so we find ourselves in this interesting position where topics become very popular on social media, and then big media news outlets feel compelled to pick up the story and talk about it after it's been picked up by social media. So in that way, we have an unprecedented level of communication and interconnectedness that we've never had before. But the problem is these social media companies do have an agenda, which is that they are corporations, that they're interested in profit, and that they are ultimately the arbiters of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable on their platforms. And while all that is fair enough, because you know they are privately owned companies and they have these rights as companies, they have, just like the utilities, the electric companies, and the others that have come before them, they have arguably become too big to remain private. They have become too powerful to lack any government or oversight by the people themselves. To merely exist on this scale with the amount of power that they have is arguably pernicious. And therefore, I think we need to step in and keep an eye on what powers they do and should have, or whether they should be given over to the people themselves.
So do you think that social media companies should have their Section 230 protections repealed?
I think it's definitely something that we need to examine more closely, yes.
And if not that, I mean, are there any other options available for how this can happen? Perhaps decentralized structure, or it be deemed a monopoly and have them broken up? I mean, what's the solution here?
I think those are the directions we're definitely headed in. I think there are people who are better qualified than I to figure out what a solution to this problem is. But I think we can undeniably say that despite the intense and incredible unforeseen benefits, there are problems that we can't just ignore. We need to address.
And how do we address large contributions made by Facebook? I know back several years ago, Facebook donated $100 million to the city of Newark. And a lot of that money went to organizations that had very close ties to Facebook. And a lot of the money never made its way into the community in Newark. So you have, politicians like former mayor of Newark, Cory Booker, who received $100 million from Facebook, and now he's a U.S. senator. I mean, a lot of senators are, their interests are intertwined with these social media companies, and they have their hands in each other's pockets. So how do we make sure that the legislation and laws protect us and not just some charlatans up top?
I think this is a problem that is more rooted in our political system than in social media companies per se. This pay to play is the way that it's basically been for a long time. While we try to limit bribery and corruption per se, there are plenty of legal ways to donate money to a politician and their campaign that grant you immense oversized power over that politician. And that is the way things have been. And I think while there are people who think that's maybe the way it should be, I happen to disagree. I think it can only lead to more harm done to the people than more help for the people. So the way to counteract that is twofold. One is that the people need to be resolute in finding candidates who are genuinely populist and who genuinely have their best interests at heart. And once we are able to identify and elect those people, we need those people to enact election reform laws, campaign finance reform, and other ways of limiting how money can replace free speech in our country.
Now, that brings us to our next topic, which is a perfect segue, actually. voting right laws in the U.S. Right now, there are many new laws that are being contemplated, many new laws that are passing. Like in Georgia, it is now, I believe it is illegal to pass either water to people in line or provide them any sort of goods, supplies to help them wait in line. I mean, what is going on with voting rights in America at the moment?
In this case, I need to name names and basically say that the Republican Party is doing everything in its power to suppress voting. And that's just the long and the short of it. It is their philosophy that the fewer people vote, the better their chances are as a party. And so they enact whatever laws they think they can that without becoming unconstitutional, that will help to suppress voting. And they are pretty open about that strategy, and I think it is ultimately harmful to our country.
Right, and I know that there are many different viewpoints on these topics, and I wanted to give you a chance to answer that. And I know that discussing many of these different viewpoints is not necessarily an endorsement of those viewpoints, but it's important for us to have that exchange of these viewpoints because it's our First Amendment right to be able to have this exchange. But in other regards, when it comes to First Amendment rights, when there's criticism of certain actions, for example, the mounting civilian toll in Gaza at the moment, for example, why is it that any criticism that is put up against the civilian casualties or put up against apartheid regimes, why is that perceived as anti-Jewish in some circles?
I think the short answer to that is that there's a group called AIPAC that has a very large influence among our politicians and among representatives of the media. And because the conflict in Israel is rather nuanced, and there are a lot of issues tied up with it that have been there ever since its founding. People, they going all the way back to the Holocaust and the oppression of Jews in World War II, people saw the founding of Israel as the correction of that. And there are also some religious Christians who believe that the reestablishment of the political state of Israel is necessary before Jesus can come back in the second coming as part of the foretold end times. And so they're enthusiastically in support of that because they want their savior to return. So it's hard for people to separate the idea of Judaism and the Jewish people as a diaspora versus the political state of Israel. And so there are groups like AIPAC who will intentionally conflate those two issues because they support the political state of Israel, and they know people are emotionally supportive of the Jewish people. So they conflate the two so that you are more reluctant to criticize the political state of Israel. But I think it's important that we keep in mind human rights as the main concern here, and that if there are people who are under deep oppression and they retaliate against that deep oppression, we need to take a step back and evaluate, are they rebelling because of a justified reaction to being oppressed, or are they merely terrorists? And I think we have to take that on a case-by-case basis. We need to evaluate it, always keeping in mind our humanitarian ideals at the forefront.
Yes, and that's very important. Human rights are something that every human deserves, and we need to be put onto a equal footing. So I do agree with what you're saying. So now moving on to the next topic. Lately, cryptocurrency has been a very big topic, and it is just exploding at the moment. In fact, just taking a look at today in the crypto market, a lot of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are down about 30% in less than one day. Dogecoin, and many other cryptocurrencies, they've really fluctuated recently. It's gone from a very gone from a very low point. I believe Dogecoin was at less than 1 penny 5 or 6 months ago, to now it is, it reached almost 70 cents. So you have these wild fluctuations occurring in the crypto market. Many countries, including China, in 2018 have banned the trading of cryptocurrencies. And despite the regulation against it, people in China still use cryptocurrency very much, despite the ban. And cryptocurrency is very volatile. That being the case, many people can make money, but they can also lose money as well. And should cryptocurrency be regulated, and how?
Well, one of the interesting things about cryptocurrency is that it's very difficult to regulate in the first place. And the reason that it sprang up to begin with is because it was a way to do exchanges of goods and services without necessarily getting the banks and federal regulators involved. Regarding the volatility of the prices, that's true of any commodity, especially new commodities. There can be speculation, and there can be markets that are responding really to the hyped demand itself. But actually, cryptocurrencies are the future. We are eventually going to replace all of our global currencies with cryptocurrencies, whether that's cryptocurrencies that the governments themselves have developed or the existing cryptocurrencies that we already know of today. The reason for that is that they are used more securely used as means of exchange for goods and services. Until that point, that banks are not perfectly acceptable by other governments. To ban cryptocurrencies is not because they're inherently dangerous or because they're inherently prone to fraud. Quite the opposite. I think it's because they want use of their own currency and they want to maintain control over them.
So is cryptocurrency the future of financial transactions and investment?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, and
it will replace fiat money currency the way that fiat money currency replaced metal coins.
Understood. So you're saying this is part of a natural progression, and many times the markets, they just need some time to adjust to the cryptocurrency?
Yes, and what we're also seeing right now is a crypto war, as it were. Everyone wants to know which cryptocurrencies are ultimately going to be successful. And if there's a way to make a quick buck, people are going to take advantage of that. So that's why we're seeing things like Dogecoin and other speculative investments get their little bubbles. But for example, we never see that volatility anymore in things like Bitcoin itself. While it can rise and fall, it's rising and falling just like any other currency can and does.
And it's kind of become the gold standard, if you will, of cryptocurrency. And now there's a discussion. No, go ahead. I'm listening.
Bitcoin was created in an extremely ethical fashion. It has the safeguards that are necessary to deem it a stable, reliable currency. It was not made just as a pump and dump investment scheme. It is actually intended to be used as a currency. And so literally the SEC does treat it as the gold standard and compares all other coins to it when those coins are being formed, and the SEC is deciding whether a coin needs to be stricken or not.
And what impact do you think Elon Musk has had on the crypto market with Bitcoin and Dogecoin or Dogcoin? That's been covered a lot in the news, that he would make a comment, and right after the comment, there would be wild fluctuations in the price where it either goes up or goes down. I believe even last week or 2 weeks ago, he was on Elon Musk was on Saturday Night Live, a TV show on NBC here in the U.S. And he made some comments about Dogecoin or Dogcoin, and as a result, the very next day, the price fluctuated wildly. I believe it tanked the day after. What sort of impact do you think he's had on the on crypto?
More important than the impact that he has had is the fact that there are already laws in place that if you say and do things to intentionally manipulate the value of a currency, you can wind up in hot water with financial regulators. So he probably should stick to engineering and be a little less vocal on Twitter and other platforms. I think the work that he's doing as far as picking up where NASA has left off and advancing our space exploration is important work that needs to be done. And I think as far as energy storage and automation, his advances are great and are helping to push our society forward. But as far as cryptocurrency, I'm not sure that he has contributed much. He's kind of the flavor of the month, except for the fact that he is quite rich and has a lot of money and a lot of market sway that way. I think he needs to step back and let cryptocurrency regulate itself.
Right. And I agree. There's a lot of things that he has contributed with his companies SpaceX and Tesla, and I think that there's going to be a lot more positive things to come on the engineering side. And I do agree with you on that. Now, according to the Census Bureau, in October of 2020, a third of working women ages 25 to 44 are unemployed. And the reason are childcare demands. And many women, they express frustration. They want to go back to the workforce. And we know that for a long time, before the pandemic, that, women are increasingly integral to the economic security to their families. We've known this for a long time, right? And women's participation in the workforce, it's one of the primary drivers of economic growth, not just here in the US, but in many places around the world. So women going back into the workforce, it makes our economy and our society stronger. What can help women get back in the workforce, and how can we accomplish this?
Women contribute immensely to the workforce, to the economy, to the workforce. They are immensely important, and their contributions cannot be overstated. The problem is that our current work system is still suffering a hangover from pre-World War II. Before World War II, it was not uncommon for the model household was the male was working out in the workforce, the female was working at home, raising the children, taking care of the home. And because the male earned enough to support the entire family, that was an efficient division of labor. Now, the problem is, built into that social arrangement was an expectation that women stayed at home. And I think that is where we were erring, in that women were looked down upon if they tried to work, if they didn't want to be housewives, if they didn't want to merely be mothers. That was seen as negative. Their contributions to the workforce, their ability in arts, sciences, and the labor force generally cannot be overstated. But we should not lose sight of the fact that once upon a time, one member of a household was making enough to support a family. Nowadays, our system is such that two members of a household are often struggling to support their family when both are working full time. Oftentimes, one or both parents will have to take on multiple jobs just to try and make ends meet. So it's this question, the problem isn't really about getting women back into the workforce. Women should be able to be in the workforce as much as they want. The real problem is, why is there record profits and record earnings by CEOs and heads of companies and stockholders when working families have effectively seen their income cut in half? That is an inequality that we all too often overlook, and I think it's one we need to address directly rather than pretend it's not there.
Right. And it's definitely something our society has to address sooner rather than later. It only benefits our society, and the longer there are inequities, it is a risk to society. So those have to get addressed, and I'm confident that they will. Now, Mr. Browning, what is the most uplifting thing happening in the world at the moment?
I think we as a society are moving toward a more just, equitable, and peaceful world. It's strange to bring it up, but we have had access to atomic weapons and the ability to destroy ourselves for about 80 years. And we have learned by force, perhaps, not to use them. We have learned how to work together with people from all over the world, from different cultures, different backgrounds. Before this period, which anthropologists call the long peace, we were having large wars on the regular every few decades. Even World War II and World War I are only approximately 20 years separated. The fact that we are learning to work together as a society, to me, is the most hopeful thing going on in the world today. We are treating ourselves as a global community rather than merely members of one country or another. We are using the internet to create business partnerships and friendships and connections that were never possible before. We are truly becoming a single global community, and that is what I find most uplifting today.
And what do you think is the most tragic thing happening in the world at the moment?
Our neglect of the environment. We are destroying our home, and we are not doing enough to stop that.
What do you think we need to do to protect our environment?
I think because it's become clear that the people making money off the destruction of the environment are not willing enough to regulate themselves, we as the people and the governments of the world need to impose much stronger, stricter regulations to make sure that everyone is doing what needs to be done.
Precisely. And I know based upon reading law.com recently that there was a precedent-setting case in New Jersey involving emotional distress, emotional damages in a court case. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how your name appeared in that article, and what transpired?
Sure, and as it happens since then, news articles have started popping up in other places like the Patch and the Asbury Park Journal. To be frank, right now it is not precedent setting. It is an unpublished case. So in the American law system, that means that it needs to first be published. It first needs to be nominated for publication and then accepted by a review panel for publishment. Otherwise, it just affects my case and not really anybody else's. But if it is published, what's going to happen is it allows people who have suffered an emotional harm to more easily bring lawsuits based on that emotional harm, based on the idea of foreseeability. If it was foreseeable that someone's conduct could create an emotional harm, a permanent psychological harm to that person, then the person who inflicted that harm can be sued, can have charges levied against them. That case is still ongoing, so I can't speak into too much detail about it, but the brief synopsis, which is publicly available, is that this person had a beloved cat. The cat had to be put down because it had a terminal illness. The animal hospital said that because the cat bit one of their techs, that it had to be tested for rabies. And they said that they were going to take a tissue sample in order to do that testing. The pet owner agreed to that, and then the pet owner said that he was going to do a public viewing of the pet's body. The hospital was aware of this. A week later, the pet owner went in to do a viewing of his pet before it was cremated, and there was his pet's headless body. He had never been told that the pet would be decapitated, and so this caused him a shock upon looking at the pet's body. Because the hospital carefully hid the fact that it was going to actually decapitate the animal, rather than merely take a tissue sample, which sounds like something you would use a syringe or do a scraping for, the hospital could be liable. That case is still pending, so I cannot say how it will ultimately come out, but the ruling by the appellate court has decided that this case cannot be thrown out, that there's enough there to go forward with a lawsuit.
I congratulate you for being on the side of justice, because that is important. When somebody can foresee that they're going to cause emotional damages, or that they're likely to cause emotional damages, they should have to pay the price for that. They should pay the consequences for that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for that, because that is important for having justice and equality in our society today. So we're almost finished. There's a couple questions I wanted to just touch on before we conclude our show for today. Now, how important is science in the world we live in?
Indispensable. Science is the basis of our society, and that is no exaggeration. We live in a petrochemical society right now based on oil. We use oil because it fuels the combustion engines that run our world. Those would not have been possible without science. And as we move on past that petrol economy, it is science that is driving the way forward. It is science that is allowing this interview to be possible. Science is one of the few beacons of light that we can keep following as a society ever on into the future.
Excellent. And I agree with you on that. You know, science is crucial. Now, one of the major themes of the show is how we can improve the world for the greater good of humanity for generations to come. How can we leave it better than we found it for the next generation? And what can we do to have that better world for the next generation, Mr. Browning?
Nice and light question.
Very light, super light.
The easiest way for us to make a better world for each other is to recognize each other, every man, woman, and child on this earth, as our family members. We are all human beings. We are all of the same species. We are all in this struggle together on this tiny blue speck in the middle of the vast ocean of space, and we only have each other. So once we recognize that we are all one family and we are all in this together, we will live in a better world.
Thank you. And many Turkish Americans and Muslim Americans currently feel disenfranchised, that their voice is not heard, or perhaps not heard enough for it to be representative. What message would you like to send to Turkish Americans and Muslim Americans?
Get organized. You can wield a lot of influence with a few number of people if you're well organized and you are persistent in your efforts. The group that I mentioned before, AIPAC, has incredible political influence with our leaders and with media leaders and so on. And Muslims outnumber Jews in America. So how is it that they have this outsized difference? It's because they're better organized. They're better organized. They are more precise in their strategy. That is really the key. Is first and foremost, you need to group together and get organized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Browning, and I want to thank you again, for coming on the show.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And before we conclude the show, I ask our audience to think about this very powerful quote from the great Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Science is the most reliable guide for civilization, for life, for success in the world. Thank you for watching the show, and see you next time.